Hello everyone. In this video we will learn about the brand new REST API in WordPress. Now before we worry about what the REST API is, let's just begin by looking at a demo of the two finished product features that we will be building together in this video. Okay, so here's my WordPress website, and if I click on to the portfolio page, there isn't very much content here, but there is a button that reads Load Portfolio Related Blog Posts. And if I click that button, you'll see that all of this new content gets loaded into the page. So when that button gets clicked, we use JavaScript or we use Ajax to visit the WordPress REST API so we can load content from the WordPress database into our web pages on the fly. Okay, so this is the first feature that we will learn how to build in this video. Let's check out the second feature by visiting the blog page. Okay, and this is just a typical blog listing page that you would see on almost any WordPress website. But you'll notice up at the top here, this gray box reads Quick Add Post. So let's imagine this is your website and you want to create a blog post right now, this very second. Maybe you don't want to hop over to the WordPress admin dashboard screen. Maybe you want to create a post right from the front end of your website. Okay, and that's exactly what we can do here. So let's come up with a title for a new post. Let's just say testing 1, 2, 3. And then let's add a bit of body content for the post. Sample text for the demo post. And then I'll click the create post button. And now if I jump over to my admin dashboard and click on posts in the sidebar, here we see that brand new testing 1, 2, 3 post. And if I click on it, there's the body content that we typed in. Okay, so we successfully created a new post from the front end on the fly without a page redirect or refresh. Okay, so those are the two example features that we will be building together. They may not be super complex or impressive, but they will teach us the basic building blocks of understanding and working with the brand new WordPress REST API. Without further ado, let's get started. So we've got to begin with the question, what exactly is the REST API? Well, in a nutshell, it's just a collection of JSON endpoints or URLs. So check this out. Here's my WordPress website, and up in the address bar, at the end of my site's address, if I tack on wp-json/wp/v2/posts and press enter, WordPress gives me the 10 most recent blog posts in JSON format. Now, if you've never heard of JSON before and you have no idea what's going on right now, that's okay. But I do recommend you pause this video and go watch my JSON and Ajax video first. Okay, but moving on, even if you've never seen JSON data in your life, this really isn't that intimidating. So let's dissect it. So we see here ID equals 152. Okay, so we know that every WordPress post has a unique numerical ID. Okay, here we see slug equals testing 1, 2, 3. So we know that each post has a slug that is the shorthand URL. Here we see title. Each post obviously has a title. Here we see content. So this is the body content for a post. You get the idea. So this is the raw data for the 10 most recent posts. What if instead of 10 posts, I only want 2 posts? Well, up on the URL at the end, I can tack on a question mark and then say per page equals 2. And now WordPress only gives me the JSON data for the 2 most recent blog posts. All right, let's try something else. What if instead of limiting the posts per page, what if I only want posts that belong to the category of opinion? Okay, so I know that my opinion category has an ID of 3, so I can say categories equals 3. Okay, so these are only opinion posts. What if I only wanted 1 post? So the single most recent opinion post. Well, up in the URL, we can combine multiple parameters. So I can just tack on the ampersand and say and per page equals 1. So this is the most recent opinion post. So you get the idea. You can tack on different parameters to retrieve the exact data you want. Now I do want to point out that the WordPress in the URL that I'm highlighting right now, this is part of my own local development URL. Okay, so this is the root URL of my project. So you wouldn't type WordPress like this. You would only type the part that I'm highlighting right now. So beginning with /wp-json. This is what you would add to the end of your WordPress site URL. Also, if you try visiting this URL on your site and you don't receive any JSON data, it's likely because your version of WordPress needs to be updated. The REST API is brand new. It was just added to WordPress in version 4.7. You can see what version of WordPress you're currently running by logging into your admin dashboard. And in the very bottom right-hand corner, you'll see your version number. Okay, let's jump back to the API tab because I want to show you that this isn't just limited to posts. So we can do the same thing for pages and comments or media or users and authors or settings, or you get the idea. Just about any piece of WordPress data is accessible from these endpoints. Okay, so at this point we have a general idea of what the REST API is. Now the question becomes, why is this such a big deal? Why are people so excited? Why are we hearing that this is the biggest wave in the WordPress ocean in recent memory? Well, it's because the REST API makes CRUD operations available from anywhere. CRUD stands for create, read, update, and delete. Now, when I was typing URLs into my browser's address bar, we were just using the read ability, so the R in CRUD, right? We were loading or reading data. But we can also create or save brand new data. So check out this example. If we send a GET request to this URL, WordPress knows to give us back the 10 most recent posts. But if we send a POST request to that exact same URL, and we also send a bit of data along with our request, so maybe we send over a title and body content, WordPress will know that we want to create a new post, and it will save the data we send into the database. Now in this lesson, we're only going to learn how to create and read, because once you understand those two, learning how to update and delete are pieces of cake. Okay, so the REST API means we can perform CRUD operations from anywhere instead of only from within the traditional WordPress admin dashboard screens. And this opens the door for all kinds of new possibilities. So for an example, we could technically create an iOS or Android native app for smartphones, and we could use WordPress as our server and database layer, and the phone app could just send and receive data to and from WordPress's JSON endpoint URLs. Or instead of a native app for phones, if we were just building a traditional web app, maybe we don't love PHP. So we could build our web app using Node.js or Ruby on Rails or Python or any language we want, as long as the language has the ability to make HTTP requests and interpret JSON, which is basically every language under the sun. So you can see how this is a game changer. WordPress can be our home base that stores our data, but now we can manipulate that data from anywhere using any technology stack we want. Now, all of these different possibilities are amazing, but in this video, we're obviously going to stay a bit closer to home, because the REST API is also great for building traditional WordPress sites, traditional WordPress themes and plugins. Now, in this video series, we've been building a theme together, so let's stick with that. Let's just get down to coding our first example feature. So remember, on my portfolio page, I want to add a button right about here, and when that button gets clicked, I want to load and insert new content into the page on the fly. Now, in order to do that, I'm going to need to write JavaScript. So the first thing I'll do is jump over to my text editor. I have open the folder for the currently active theme, and I'm going to create a subfolder for my JavaScript files just to stay organized. So new folder, I'll name the new folder JS. Okay, and then within that new subfolder, I'll create a new file. And I can name the file anything I'd like, but I'll call it main.js. And just as a test, let's log out to the console a bit of text that says hello from main.js. Let's save this, and then our next step is to include this JavaScript file within our PHP or HTML templates. Now there are many different ways to do that. Let me show you the official or proper way of including a JavaScript file in WordPress. So within our functions.php file, up at the top from an earlier lesson, we already have a function named Learning WordPress Resources. And this is where we are loading our CSS file. So within your functions.php file, if you don't already have a function that's hooked on to the WP and Q scripts action, go ahead and copy the code that you see here. And underneath this line where we include the CSS file, let's include our JavaScript file. So we can use a function named WP in Q script. The first argument is our chance to give this JavaScript file a handle or a name. It doesn't really matter what we name it, so I'm just going to name it main.js. Feel free to make up your own name. And then the second argument is just a path that points towards the file. So to point towards our theme folder, we can use a function named getTemplateDirectoryURI. So that points to the base of our theme folder, and then we want to concatenate on a path to our JS subfolder. So /js, and then the name of the file was main.js. The next argument is our chance to list any dependencies, so any files that our JavaScript code depends on. So potentially that might be jQuery, or it could be the handle name of another script. In our case, our JavaScript doesn't really have any dependencies, so I'm just going to type null. The next argument is the version of your script. So I'm just going to say version 1.0. And then the final argument is whether you want this JavaScript file to load in the header or the footer of your website. So if you say true, your file will load right before the closing body tag, which is usually what you want. If for some reason you did want to load your JavaScript in the header, just change this to false. All right, so let's save this and refresh the page. And if I check the console, we know that we successfully included the JavaScript file because we see this hello message. So now we can go back to our JavaScript file, delete this test code, and actually write the real JavaScript. But before we do that, I actually want to adjust the portfolio page template to add in the HTML button. So to edit the portfolio template, I'll just look in my text editor for the file named page-portfolio. If you want to follow along but use a different page or template in your WordPress instance, remember you can always just create a file named page- and then the name of the slug of the page that you want to customize. Okay, hence the name page-portfolio PHP. So within my template, right beneath the main content, I'll create a button element which reads load portfolio related blog posts. In order to easily select this element with JavaScript, I'll give it an ID of portfolio posts button. Okay, and then below this button element, I will also create a completely empty div, and this is where we will insert the content we get from the WordPress REST API. We'll add it into this empty div on the fly. So in order to select this empty div in our JavaScript, let's give it an ID of portfolio posts container. All right, let's save this and jump back to our JavaScript. And I'll create a variable that selects our button element, so this element. So we'll say var portfolio posts button equals document get element by ID. Remember, it had an ID of portfolio posts button. Okay, and let's create another variable for the empty div. So var portfolio posts container. And to select that element, document get element by ID, portfolio posts container. If you've never selected elements with JavaScript like this before, I recommend watching my JavaScript in half an hour video. And then this code should make more sense. Okay, but this video is on the WordPress REST API, so I'll try to keep things rolling. Now, we want to do something when that button gets clicked. So let's add an event listener. So we'll start with that button element, portfolio posts button, and then we'll use a method named add event listener. And the event that we're listening for is the click event when the button gets clicked. And then the second argument is what we want to actually happen. So you could create a separate function and list that function name here, or we can just create an anonymous function And whatever we want to happen when it gets clicked, we can just type right here. So as a test, let's say console.log, the button was clicked. So if I save this and refresh the page, notice my console is empty, but as soon as I click that button, we see the button was clicked. Okay, so our code is working. Now I do want to point out that this button will not exist on every single page of our WordPress website. So why don't we make our JavaScript a bit more bulletproof by wrapping this within an if statement to only run if that button exists on the current page. So we can just say if, and then we can just type the variable name of that element. So if portfolio post button, that's all we need for the condition check, and then just open up curly brackets, and then let's just cut and paste this code within the if statement body. Now, when the button gets clicked, we don't actually want to log this test message to the console. So let's delete that. What we actually want to do is use Ajax to send a request to the WordPress REST API to retrieve the desired data. Now again, this is a video on the WordPress REST API, not Ajax in general. If you're unfamiliar with the term Ajax and you've never used it before, that's A-OK. But I recommend pausing this video and watching my JSON and Ajax video first. In that video, I break down Ajax piece by piece so you really understand what's going on. Okay, but to keep this video rolling along at a nice tempo, I'm just going to paste in a bit of standard boilerplate Ajax code. Now, I want you to follow along with me, so in the description for this video, you'll find a link either to my website or to CodePen, and that link will have this exact code that I just pasted in, so that way you can copy and paste it as well. Okay, now the most important line of the code that I just pasted in is this our request.open line. So what we're doing here is we're sending a GET request. We want to get data, and notice what URL we're sending that request to. So this is my local WordPress setup, the part that is highlighted, but your URL will be different. So right now, I want you to pause the video and replace this code with whatever your development WordPress root URL is. Don't worry, later on in the video, we'll learn how to set things up so you don't have to hard code your root URL. But for right now, it's okay, it won't hurt anything. So go ahead and swap this out with your URL. And then this is the magical part of the URL. So we're hitting up the WordPress REST API, and this endpoint should give us the 10 most recent blog posts. Okay, then if we jump down a few lines, if the Ajax connection and request is successful, we're saving the response text to a variable named data. Again, all of this code will make sense after you watch the JSON and Ajax tutorial. But I want to keep this video under the 100-hour mark, so let's keep rolling. Underneath this line, just as a test, why don't we log out to the console the data variable so we can see what we're working with. So let's say console.log data. Okay, so let's save that, refresh, I'll click the button, and when I check my console, perfect, just what we would expect. So we see 10 objects. Each one is a post. So if we expand this and click on this first one, this is all of the info for a portfolio post. So here you can see the slug, portfolio post 3. Here's the title, if we drill into that, portfolio post 3. Okay, you get the idea. So now, all we need to do is use JavaScript to convert that raw JSON data into human-readable HTML content. So why don't we do this? Down at the very bottom of our JavaScript file, let's create a brand new function. We can name it whatever we want. Let's call it create HTML. Okay, and then back up within our Ajax code, instead of logging out that data to the console, let's call our create HTML function and let's pass it the data. Okay, so then back down within that function, within the parentheses, let's add a parameter to receive that JSON data. We can name the parameter anything we'd like. I'll call it posts data. And then within this function, we just want to loop through that raw JSON data. We want to loop through it to create a giant HTML string, and then we'll add that string into the empty container div that we created a bit ago. Now again, this is a video on the REST API, not JavaScript in general. So if you're not familiar with a for loop, or if you've never worked with an array before, that's okay, but I recommend watching my JavaScript in half an hour video or the JSON and Ajax video first. So let's create a new variable to store our HTML string. Let's call it our HTML string. And for now, we'll set it to equal nothing, just an empty set of quotes. And now what we're going to do is loop through this array of JSON data. And for each post or for each object in this array, we will concatenate on a bit of HTML to our string. So check this out. Let's create a for loop. We want to keep looping as long as I is less than the length of this array. Posts data.length, increment I. Okay, and then for each post, we want to concatenate on to our variable. So our HTML string plus equals to add on to it. Let's begin by adding a heading level 2 element in HTML. And we want to output the title of each post. So we'll add on data that lives in our array, posts data. We'll use our I variable to grab the current object in the array. And let's look at the raw JSON data for a second to find out how we can access the title. So there's a property named title, and then nested within it, there's an object with a property named rendered, and that's where the actual title lives. So to access that in our JavaScript, we would say .title.rendered. Okay, and then let's add on the closing heading level 2 tag. Next, let's output the actual content for the post, right? So the body of text, the paragraphs of text. So we could keep adding on to this line, but in order to keep things readable, let's just drop down to a new line. And again, we want to keep adding on to our string. So we want data that lives in the array of JSON. So post data, get the current item. We want the property named content, and then just like we did with title, we want to look within it for the property named rendered. Okay, so this will give us the paragraphs of text, the body text, and that's really all we need, the title and the content for each post. So once this for loop runs, we will be happy with our HTML string. So now we just want to add this string to the empty div on the page. So if I scroll back up to the top of the JavaScript, remember we already created a variable for that empty div. So its name is portfolio posts container. So down in this function, after our for loop, let's select that empty div. So portfolio posts container. And let's set its inner HTML property to equal our HTML string. All right, let's save this and test it out. Looks good. So we see a title and content for each post, except we didn't just want the 10 most recent posts. We only wanted posts from the portfolio category. So to fix that, back in our JavaScript, if we scroll up to our AJAX call, on this line where we set up our GET request, let's adjust the API URL that we are visiting. So at the end of the URL, we can tack on a question mark and say categories equals. And I know that the ID for my portfolio category is 6. But you could use whatever category you want in your particular WordPress instance. So let's save that and refresh. And now we only see 3 posts because I only have 3 posts in my portfolio category. Also, we could customize the ordering of the posts. So by default, it starts with the newest post and then works its way backwards. But if we wanted the oldest post to be on top, we could adjust the API URL that we're visiting. So I could tack on an ampersand and say, and order should equal ascending instead of descending. So let's save that. And now if I refresh, instead of 3, 2, 1, we see 1, 2, 3. All right, and the one final improvement I want to make to this feature is once this button gets clicked, there's no reason to click it a second time, so why don't we remove the button from the page after it's clicked? So in our JavaScript, why don't we wait to remove the button until our AJAX call has successfully ran, and we've had a chance to call our createHTML function. So right underneath this line, we can select that button element with the variable we set up earlier in the video. So portfolio posts button, and we can just use the remove method. Let's save this. And now when we click the button, Perfect, it disappears once the content loads. And that means we've completed one out of our 2 example features in this video. Before we change gears and start working on the second feature, why don't you pause the video, go get a snack or something to drink, and when you get back, we will learn how to save new content to the database using the REST API. Welcome back. Let's start working on our second example feature. If you think back to the very beginning of this video, you will remember that on my blog listing page, at the top of this left-hand column, I had a form that admin users could fill out that would let them create a brand new blog post from the front end of their website, instead of having to switch over to the admin dashboard. So right now, let's start working together to implement that feature. Now really, you could add that form to any page or any template you want, but in my case, I'm going to add it to this generic blog listing page. So in my text editor, the template file that contains the blog listing screen is index.php. Here's the opening div tag for the main column. So let's add a bit of new HTML to the beginning of this div. To keep this video moving at a nice tempo, I'm not going to write out the HTML by hand. I'm actually just going to paste in a bit of HTML. And remember, I want you to follow along. So in the description for this video, you'll find a link where you can copy and paste this HTML. There's nothing fancy going on. It's just a div with a heading level 3, an input field for the title of a potential new blog post, and a text area for the body content, and then a submit button. Okay, so if I save this and refresh the page, the HTML is completely unstyled. It looks like a mess. So I'm going to jump into my CSS file, style.css. I'll scroll to the very bottom. Let's add a comment and say quick add form styles, just to stay organized. And again, to keep this video moving along quickly, instead of typing out CSS, I'm just going to paste in a bit of code. Again, in the description for this video, you'll find a link where you can also copy and paste this CSS into your file. Let's save this. Okay, that looks much better. Now we just need to write a bit of JavaScript so that when someone fills out these fields and clicks the Create Post button, something useful actually happens. So in my text editor, let's jump back into our JavaScript file. I'm going to scroll down to the bottom. Let's add a comment just to stay organized. Quick add post Ajax. Okay, let's begin by creating a variable that selects this Create Post Submit button. So we'll say var quick add button equals document. Now throughout this video, to select elements with JavaScript, I've been using document get element by ID. But you can also instead say document query selector. And then you can just provide it a CSS-like or jQuery-like selector. So remember that quick add button had an ID of quick add button. So we can just say pound or hashtag for the ID, quick add button. Okay, now we want to add an event listener, so we want to be on the lookout for that button getting clicked. And because that button doesn't exist on every single page of the website, I'm going to begin with an if statement. So we'll say if quick add button. Okay, so only if we're on a page where that button exists do we want to set up an event listener. So then we will select that element, so quick add button, add event listener. We're listening for the click event, and then we'll supply an anonymous function. So whatever we type here is what will happen when this button gets clicked. So let's write a bit of standard Ajax code. We want to send information to the server. So let's create a new variable. We can name it whatever we want. Let's call it create post. And we'll set it to equal a new instance of the web browser's XML HTTP request. So now we will use that create post variable and say open. The first argument is what type of request we're sending. So if we wanted to load data or read data from the server, we would send a GET request. But in this case, we want to send data to the server. So we want to make a POST request. Okay, and then the second argument is the URL that we want to send our request to. So a pair of quotes, and then I'm just going to paste in my local WordPress dev environment root URL. So that would be something different for you. A bit later on in the video, we'll learn how to set things up so you don't have to hard code this root part of your URL like this. But let's keep things simple for now. So at the end of your dev environment URL, be sure to add on /wp-json /wp/v2. Remember, this is the WordPress REST API part of the URL. And then we want /posts. Now you might be thinking, hey, isn't this the URL that will retrieve the 10 most recent blog posts? Well, yes, if we send a GET request. But since we're sending a POST request, WordPress will know what to do. It will know that we want to create a new post. So then our next step is to drop down another line and use our create post variable and just say send. So within the parentheses of this send method is where we include the data from our form that we want to send along. So that means we need to use JavaScript to extract the value of whatever the user types into these fields. So to do that, above our create post variable, why don't we create a brand new line? And let's create a new variable. We can name it whatever we want. Let's call it our post data. And let's just set it to equal an object. Now, the name of our object here doesn't matter, but what does matter is the name of the properties that live within it. So for example, we want to be sure to have a property named title. This will be the title of the blog post. And we want to set this property to equal whatever the user has typed into this first field. So let's select that input field. So document, I will use query selector. Let's go look at our HTML. So I'm trying to select the value of this input. I could give this element an ID and then select it by the ID, but instead I can select it by its name value. Now, just in case there are multiple forms on the page, let's begin by selecting our admin quick add div. So query selector, period for a class, admin quick add. Okay, and then I want to look inside that div for the input field element that had a name of title. This code will select that element, and then once it's selected, we want to tack on .value in order to get the text that the user has typed. All right, then let's add a comma because we want to add another property to this object. We want our blog post to have a title. We also want it to have content. So if I look at the HTML again, now I want to select this text area element. We can see that it has a name of content. So back in our JavaScript, I'm just going to recycle this line of code. So copy, paste, and change the name that we're looking for from title to content. All right, let's add a comma here, drop down to a new line, because there's one final property that I want to add to our object, and that is status. This is where we decide if we want the post to be saved as just a draft, or if we want it to be finalized and actually published. I want to skip the draft phase, so let's just say publish. All right, and now our object is complete. So these property names will line up with what WordPress is on the lookout for. It's expecting these property names. And then if we scroll down, when we actually send our AJAX request within the parentheses of the send method, let's just include our post data. Okay, so that's what we're sending to the server. But we probably shouldn't send just a raw object to the server. So instead what we can do, let's delete this. And what we want to do is convert this JavaScript object into a simple string of text. Okay, and then it's up to the server to reinterpret that string as JSON. So within our send, we can just say JSON.stringify and then pass it our object. So our post data. All right, this line looks good. Before we save this and test it out in the browser, there's just a couple more things we need to take care of. We want to be sure to spell out exactly what our AJAX request is sending, because we know that we're sending JSON, but we want to let the server know ahead of time that that's what we're intending to send. So check this out. Right above our send line, let's add a new line, and let's say create post, and then let's use a method named setRequestHeader. Okay, and for the first argument, we want to say that we are specifying the content type. And then for the second argument, we just let the server know that we want to send JSON. So we say application/JSON. And we also want to let the server know what character set we're using. So char set equals UTF-8. All right, and now we are only one step away from having this code work. Our final step has to do with authentication and security. So WordPress takes care of the basic security. When someone fills out this form and tries to send an AJAX request, WordPress will only honor that request if it's from a signed-in user. Okay, so that basic level of security is baked into the WordPress REST API by default, but in order to make things even more secure and prevent cross-site exploits, WordPress requires us to send along a unique code for the currently signed-in user with our AJAX request. So let's do this. Above this line where we just set the request header, let's create a new line. And we want to send another request header, so create post set request header. This time we want to send something that WordPress is on the lookout for. Its name is XWP nonce. I believe this stands for number used once, so I'm not exactly sure how to pronounce it, but that's not important. Okay, and then the second argument is just the secret code for the currently signed in user. Now obviously we have no way of guessing what that secret code is. But what we can do is use PHP to output or echo that code into the HTML for the page, and then we can use our JavaScript to reference that. So to do that, let's jump into our functions.php file. And remember earlier in the lesson when we included our JavaScript file? Well, within that same function, right below that line where we include the JavaScript, let's just drop down, and we can use a function named WP localize script. Okay, the first argument is the handle or name of our script file. So main.js. That's the WordPress name we gave to our JavaScript file earlier. The second argument is the name of the object that we want to output or echo into the HTML. So we could make up any name we want. Let's just call it magical data. And then the third argument is an array of what we want to output. So for example, I could say mood equals happy, sky equals blue, grass equals green. You get the idea. And if I save this and refresh the page and view the HTML source and then search for the object name of magical data, here we see it. So that PHP we just wrote will output a bit of inline JavaScript, creates a variable named magical data, and then it's just a JavaScript object. So property mood with a value of happy, property sky with a value of blue, you get the idea. So let's go back to our PHP. Let's delete these example properties. And remember, what we really want is the code for the currently signed in user. So let's say nonce equals. And to get that value, we can use a WordPress function named WP create nonce. And for the argument, we can just say WP rest. All right, let's save this file and jump back into our JavaScript. So now in our AJAX request, when we are setting the request header for the WP nonce, we can access that code. So within the HTML, there will be an inline JavaScript object named magical data, and it will contain a property named nonce. Let's be sure to add a semicolon at the end of this line. Let's save it and let's go test things out. So I'll add a sample title, testing for the video, add a bit of content, lorem ipsum 123, hit create post. Obviously we'll need to work on the user experience a bit, but let's go see if that worked. So in the dashboard, let's refresh the post listing. I don't see the post, so that means it didn't work. Let's jump back to this tab and check the console for errors. Okay, so we've got an error, missing closing parentheses in our JavaScript on line 41. So line 41. I see the problem. So we used double quotes within the selector right here, and you can only use double quotes within the selector if your outside containing quotes are single quotes. So let's swap that from a double to a single, and then this closing quote, swap it to a single. Let's do the same thing on line 42. So swap that with a single quote, swap this final quote with a single quote, save it, refresh it. Testing 1, 2, 3, 4, lorem ipsum, create post, check the dashboard. Perfect, there it is. So if we click on it, there's the title and there's the body content. So we just created a brand new post using Ajax and the WordPress REST API. Now before we end this video, why don't we improve the user experience a little bit? So if our Ajax request is successful and WordPress creates a post, why don't we clear out these two fields for the user? And if our Ajax request fails for some reason, we can just alert a pop-up message that says, error, try again. I know that's not the pinnacle of user experience, but I think it'll be a good example to work on. So back in our JavaScript, after our Ajax send line, let's create a new line. Use our create post variable and say on ready state change. We'll set it to equal an anonymous function. And remember, the A in Ajax stands for asynchronous. So before I try and check to see if the Ajax request was successful or not, I first want to wait and give it time to actually complete. So we'll use an if statement, and we'll say if our create post, only if its ready state equals 4, only if that's the case do we want to try and determine if the post was successfully created or not. The ready state will change from 1, 2, 3, 4 as it works through the stages of initially sending the request and waiting to hear back from the server. You get the idea. So 4 is when it's complete. So once it completes, then we want to run another if statement to see if WordPress successfully created the post or if it ran into an error. So we can check that by saying create post. We want to look at the status property. And WordPress will return a value of 201 if it successfully created the new blog post entry. Okay, so if that's the case, we'll do one thing, but else, otherwise, that means we ran into an error. So if there's an error, why don't we just alert a pop-up message that says error, try again. Super helpful, right? And if it did successfully create the post, why don't we clear out these two form fields? So that way the user could start typing and creating another post. So let's select those input fields here. We already have the selector up here, so I'm just going to copy and paste it. So I just want to set that field's value to equal an empty string. Okay, and then let's do the same thing for the other field. So let's copy and paste this. Set its value to equal an empty string. Okay, let's save this and refresh in the browser. So if I leave the two fields blank and hit create post, perfect. We see the error message pop up, error, try again. But if I fill them out correctly, this is a test, hello world. It was successful, and we see that it cleared out the two fields for me. So I could start typing a new post, another post, hooray. And you get the idea. So at this point, our feature is complete, but you might be wondering, what if someone who isn't signed into WordPress visits our website, right? So currently I'm using Google Chrome and I'm signed in as the admin of this website. But if I view this website in a different browser, so this window is Mozilla Firefox, and in this window I'm not signed into WordPress. So I obviously should not have permission to create a new blog post. So if I try to, you see that I get an error. And that's good. That means WordPress is taking care of permissions and authentication for us. But if someone isn't signed in as an admin, it doesn't even make sense to show them this form in the first place. So what we can do, if we jump into our index.php file, here's the HTML for that form. Why don't we just wrap this in an if statement? So drop into PHP, if, and then we can use a function named current user can, and we only want admin users to see this form. So for the argument, we'll just say administrator. All right, and then after this if statement, we'll include a colon, not a semicolon, and we'll drop out of PHP. And then right when the HTML for this form ends, so on this line, we'll just drop back into PHP, close out the if statement, so end if, drop back out of PHP, and there you go. So save this and then go back to Firefox and refresh. Remember, I'm not signed in on this web browser. Perfect, so now I can no longer see that admin form, but back in Google Chrome where I am signed in, it's still in place. Okay, now we just have one remaining detail to cover before we end the video. Remember earlier I promised that I would show you how to set things up in your JavaScript so that you don't have to hard code the root URL of your WordPress project. Wouldn't it be nice if we could just include a variable instead of this part of the URL? Because then our code would work whether we are testing in our local development environment or if we push the code up to our production live website. So here's what I recommend doing. Let's jump into our functions.php file. And remember earlier when we set up this WP localized script function? This is where we created our magical data object and we stored the nonce code. Well, inside this array, we can just add on another property to our object. We can name this property anything we want. Let's call it site URL. And let's just set it to equal the results of a WordPress function named get site URL. Let's save this and then jump back into our JavaScript. Remember the property name here that we're interested in is site URL. So in my JavaScript, let's just delete this hard-coded part of the root URL. So now all we are left with is the API part of the URL. And then right before this, we can just say magical data. Remember that's the name of the object that our PHP creates and outputs as inline JavaScript. And then we want the property named site URL. And then we can just concatenate on the API part of our URL. Okay, and if I scroll up, remember we also had the hard-coded URL in our GET request from the first example in this video. So let me swap that out, delete this, magical data.site URL, concatenate on that part of the URL. Okay, let's save this, go back to the browser, refresh, let's take it for a quick spin. URL variable post test, testing 1, 2, 3. Perfect, and if we go back to the portfolio page, and click on this button to load the content, it still works as well. And that's going to bring this video to a close. Thank you so much for watching. I know this was a long video. I think this is the longest video on my channel, but we had a lot to cover with the new REST API. I hope you feel like you learned something, and I hope this sparked your imagination, because just with the concepts we learned in this video, you can create all sorts of new features. This really opens the door of what's possible with WordPress, and it makes Ajax a breeze. Anyways, thanks for stopping by, and I will see you in a new video next week. So until then, take care. In case you're interested, I am working on 2 brand new premium WordPress courses. One is aimed at absolute beginners, and the other is more advanced, and it's aimed at developers. In the more advanced course, we will create a fully featured site for a university. We'll learn how to create relationships between different types of content. So for example, between professors and courses and campuses. We'll also learn how to set up live search results using the brand new WordPress REST API. We'll learn the basics of user registration. And we'll also learn how to keep our project organized and how to deploy it from your local dev environment up to a real host. Now these 2 courses won't launch for another couple of months. But if either of them interests you and you want to be notified as soon as they do launch, you can go to my website, learnwebcode.com, and towards the top of the homepage, you can join my newsletter. Not only will that let you know as soon as the courses launch, but you'll also receive hugely discounted coupons. One last thing, you'll never ever see this channel with a Patreon account, because if you do want to support this channel, I want you to receive massive value in return. So I do already have 2 premium courses available. The first course is about 9 hours and it will teach you HTML and CSS from absolute scratch. And the second course is about 15 hours and it's for you if you already know HTML and CSS, but you want to build up the rest of your skill set so you can land a full-time job as a web developer. All right, that's enough shameless promotion. I will see you in the next video.